This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal Cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
Hey guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast. It's been kind of a downtime in MTG finance, and we've kind of been digging into some stuff in the background, and we figured something we'd kind of want to cover is kind of tangentially related to a topic I've been beating to death, which is that Magic is dying and the sky is falling. But basically, during this time, what some vendors, collectors, stuff like that are doing, because it's kind of like a pattern we've noticed of people basically divesting from MTG finance and moving into other kinds of collectible finance. So it's just one of those like, hey, this is kind of related to this. Maybe try to see what's out there if Magic is kind of not doing it for you anymore.
Yeah.
So
yeah, or maybe you have another interest in another game for another reason, or just another collectible. You know, there are people making this switch. Don't feel like you should stick with Magic because you're deeply vested in it.
yeah, you can very often, especially now, there's vendors that do everything, not just Troll, not just, Star City, whatever. You can find bigger vendors, even the GP vendors, and be like, hey, I have a bunch of Magic cards and I want to divest into something else.
So one person we wanted to highlight in particular is actually Les Alex on Twitter. This is somebody that you actually know. We watched them go from working inside Magic to, over the last couple of months, stepping away and moving into sports cards. I believe it might have been slanted baseball first, and now it's predominantly baseball and NBA.
Yep.
They now
Two
have
sports he loves the most.
Yep. They now have their own website, Discord set up dedicated to this, and basically have just moved into the realm of sports cards.
Yeah. So it's the thing that's interesting about this, and this is something we kind of touched on when we were talking about mature versus immature markets and just differences between collectibles. And one of the things that's really attractive about sports cards, which I myself have actually been getting more into, now over the last couple of years, they've really just exploded. So Mahomes entered the NFL, and all of a sudden there was a current print set by Panini, National Treasures, that was hitting $10,000 to $17,000 a case, which is unheard of for an in-print product at Magic.
Yep.
And one of the reasons that stuff like that is happening is because you have cards like this. So this is a Drew Pearson autograph with a game-worn jersey that is numbered 13 of 15. There are only 15 of this card in the entire world. And that's something that Wizards doesn't necessarily disclose. So you have a known quantity of how many of a certain card you have in some cases, and those are obviously the more desirable ones. Those are the ones that people want more of, and it's a lot easier for someone who's in like the lay and not necessarily into the minutia and has very entrenched vendor knowledge of prices to kind of see something like that and say, hey, there's only 10 of these in the world. This has got to be worth something. And it's kind of intoxicating to have that and get into that when you're going from Magic. And you have the added element of, oh, you know what's great? I collect Cowboys cards. Yeah, I'm a Cowboys fan. Kill me, whatever.
We can't all be winners.
That's true. We certainly can't. And it's another way to identify with another fandom and kind of have something else that you can strike up a conversation about.
Yep. Because
you're passionate about your team, you're passionate about the players, and it's just really nice to have. So you've seen some people kind of move into that.
Yeah, and it's different than gaming, as you mentioned, because it's a completely different group of people. It's a completely different aspect of life. For a lot of people, sports are life. Outside of their 9 to 5, it's their way to relax. They just get to watch competition, and we do too inside our gaming realm. But we're also able to compete at various levels as well in our own communities, and so it offers a bridge to something else, something different, which is nice. Sports cards in particular is going to be something we focus on here because of the boom in the market, and we've heard, and I can find tales of this, but I cannot find an actual article that says people like Warren Buffett have begun to move into the graded sports card market, even if it's just to kind of toe in to really essentially set up a foundation and begin to build on. So when you have somebody who's this kind of like financial apex predator move in, and they start lending their weight and their belief that this market is real, you're going to have other people move in as well, other sharks in essence, not whales. And I want to be clear here, these are not whales, these aren't homers, these are sharks, people who know what they're doing. And people move in, and somebody like Gary, I believe it's Vaynerchuk, so I pronounce his last name, moved in last year or the year before as well. And you can find it all over his Twitter and his website, that he's begun to move into sports cards, something he used to do as a kid. And about a year ago, he wrote his article about why he moved in, because he thought sports cards were going to be the way to go, both for finance and have a cultural impact. And at the same time, he was also dabbling with Magic and Pokemon, although I believe he pulled back from Magic. However, he's does have a little bit of stock in slabbed Pokemon because nostalgia.
Yeah.
But this is somebody else that's now lending their voice to sports cards. And Gary Vee is well known in the marketing world. If you follow any kind of marketer on Twitter, they're going to be usually quoting or talking to / at Gary Vee. His books are fairly widely read. I think it's like Jab, 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 Left Punch or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a marketing book from a couple years ago that's kind of industry standard. And he is all over the place. He's highly visible, and the videos of him at his own booth at sports card conventions over the last year are rampant on Instagram. I think he started his own Insta for it, so it's off of his main one, but you can find it really easily, and you'll just see a litany of videos of him cracking those Panini packs, of him opening his graded mail, like what he got back, a la graded Power and Magic. And the more this happens, the more people come to agree that this market is stable, it's one you can move into, it's one you can capitalize on, and it's one that is kind of underserved because it's just a trading card. There's not much more to it than that, so you need people who want to buy purely into a collectibles market to do so. But all these powerful people are there. All this money is there now. It is becoming more legitimized than it was before in that regard.
And it's also interesting to see because there's a little bit more liquidity into it because of the identity that goes into it. You know, as Magic players, we constantly, the metagame shifts, we change decks. You may be like me and you're like, well, I'm just always going to play grindy mid-range and that's my identity. Yeah. And you kind of touched on, sometimes when you have like, I identify with a city. St. Louis is known for the best fans in baseball. So it's part of the city identity, and you get. I think it was a couple weeks ago, and we have the link for it. Mike Trout graded auto $3.9 million that the guy bought 4 years ago for $400K, and he 10x'd in 4 years, and that's absurd. And that's how you're seeing a lot of these people start to move in because all of this money is there. Mm-hmm. There was a card this year, Zion Rookie, that had a $500,000 buy list. Buy list of $500,000. And you see things like this, and of course, people naturally kind of move into it. Mm-hmm. And, that's one aspect that they're moving into is like the sports collectible world. And then, the other card game that a lot of people move into, which you touched on, is Pokemon.
Yes.
I know for a fact there's a number of vendors at most of the GP booths, TOA, MTG Mint, Cool Stuff, Moose, all over the place at 95 that they're all like, hey, I'm personally, I'm going to go in on Pokemon. Mm-hmm. Because it's fun, it's neat, and it's nostalgic.
Yep.
And you've seen that market blow up. Last year I bought a sealed first edition Team Rocket box for $3,500, and it's going for about $8K right now. Because it's just exploded. Mm. And it's interesting, and you're tracking some as well, right? You've got some old Pokemon yourself.
Yep. I have a chunk of my collection that I finally just kind of tracked out the other day because when Pokemon Go hit, I decided to finish out my Shadowless base set because I had the money card already. I opened the Charizard when I was a child, so the rest of the set cost me like under $200. And I was like, well, they're literally sitting in my closet next to my cube. Let's track this out. And the absurdity of all the cards in the set are ridiculous. Cards that just don't matter anymore because people either want to put the sets together, they just like the Pokemon, the nostalgia for the original base set, and that continues through, like you mentioned, Team Rocket. It's not just base, it is the WotC era, where WotC was actually printing these sets, and they stopped, I think, one set after Rocket. I think it's Gym Heroes or something like that, and that was the last set that WotC made, and then Nintendo had pulled back the contract. But that entire era of the game is basically just coming back with a vengeance. It was also helped that at the time Nintendo reprinted essentially a mashup set of Base Jungle and Fossil for a standard environment. You could play all those old cards again with a little bit of retooling to make the current to work within the current rule set, and some of the things that were just too overpowering back then removed from the set. So things like, I don't think Wigglytuff was in there because that just ran the game for a while. And that's become a market that we've seen kind of publicly grow for a while. What's been happening behind the scenes is slabbing. And the slab stuff is what really just kind of demands an incredible premium. I didn't think to look it up, but you can find a video from Pawn Stars a couple of years ago where a gentleman walks in with like 10 or 12 graded 9+ base set Charizards, and I don't know if they're all first ed or anything like that, but those guys were shocked to see that many of that one card slabbed as high as it was. And that's what's going on behind the scenes for that game. The churn is absolutely there regardless. It doesn't matter what era of Pokemon, it's always going to be hot. What is surprising is how hot the standard sets are, not just the nostalgia-driven stuff. And if the sets are good for constructed, it's wildfire, and they are nigh impossible to keep in stock. If you're looking for something that's easy to churn, Craigslisting or Facebook marketplacing Pokemon is the way to go. A lot of people just have stuff kicking around from forever ago. We're definitely still in that era of found it at a garage sale when it comes to Pokemon. And anything that is first edition sells easily. If it's notable, it also sells easily. And the only time it's very hard to sell anything is in the kind of nascent years of the Nintendo era, where they were still figuring out the game, and it basically died out for the next, I'd say, 3-ish generations of Pokemon. And I don't mean sets. I mean like three games worth of sets up until maybe Black and White. Once that game came out for the Game Boy, the card game became good again. I don't know what happened. I wasn't playing. I wasn't paying attention. The other thing is the game itself has a very entrenched audience, and they do play online. Pokemon packs come with a card to redeem a pack online that still carries value. It's about $1 each at booth. So you crack a box, sell the singles, and then sell the lot of codes for $36, and there's just extra value in your box. If I was going to move away from Magic, Pokemon would be the game I go to because I understand it better, and it makes more sense as a game and engine than Yu-Gi-Oh! Does, where things are constantly changing, and everything is legal until it's banned.
Yeah.
So
it's also interesting because it's one of the markets where you do have an active player base, and you're seeing basically what mirrors the old school boom in Magic a couple years ago, where things weren't necessarily great economically, so people started investing into like non-depreciating assets and collectibles. So you're kind of seeing this explosion right now with old school Pokemon, and I know a number of people that are playing old school Pokemon, which is basically WotC era, with modern deck building philosophy behind it that are just kind of doing it. And it's interesting to see this happen in another market, because right now it's happening at like the very high levels, and that's where it's exploding. And like you mentioned, you're starting to see the explosion on the lower end stuff, where there's just trash Professor Oak level commons that are hitting $10-$20, which is you would think is unheard of, but then you see stuff where like Repentant Blacksmith hits $50, which is, I still think, fake. And that's not something that we've really seen in a collectible game outside of Magic. So it's interesting to see that it's now being mirrored and that you're having the same movement into that field.
Yeah.
So.
And it's not like Pokemon is that much younger a game than Magic. The base set is copyrighted 96, 97, 98, 99, 99.
Yeah.
And so you're looking at a game that was in development for those 4 years as Magic was actively being produced. Magic was 2 years old by the time Pokemon, and Magic had been in development for years, but was publicly 2 years old by the time at least the Pokemon card game had been copyright.
Yeah.
So they're not that far off. Yu-Gi-Oh comes like another 2 years later, I think, but that is out of my purview.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to note that personally, I think there's a bit more longevity to Pokemon. The thing about Magic is, when it started and we first started playing, we were the majority.
Mm-hmm.
As we've gotten older, we're still the majority. So the audience is aging up. So you're seeing the financial explosion there. Pokemon's interesting because the audience is still young kids and people our age.
Yes.
So you're getting the 20 and 30 somethings that just like playing competitive games that are pushing a financial market, while you also have the younger market pushing those standard singles. And it's been interesting to see it. You go to your LGS for Pokemon Night, and it's an incredibly diverse, like age 10 to 30 that are there to play, and they're, all of them are spending the time and money on it. So it's kind of interesting because, personally, even though I'm in sports cards, that is a bubble market that I think is going to burst, because there's a current set slabbed card that broke the T206 record, and that's insane to me.
Yep.
Anyways,
interesting
but
note about
has staying power.
Yes, interesting note about Pokemon is that outside of the FNM level, at the competitive level, there's actually a split in division. There's a juniors and an adults. So unlike Magic, where anybody that shows up to a Magic Fest with the money to pay entry can play in the event, and you have children playing against entrenched adults, Pokemon actually splits it out, and the metas for those two are completely different. So the price drivers for that game are actually kind of wild. There are a lot of times they'll coalesce around certain things, but more often than not, you'll see a lot of the children that are competing playing the decks they like with the characters they like, or what they can afford, really, and the adults are the ones setting the true metagame, playing the most tuned decks because they can afford those cards. So it drives not the entire market, because you still have draft shaft. You do draft in that game. That's an aspect of Pokemon. You draft it at some point, but it does push a larger swath of the market because of that. So
bring back the JSS.
I mean,
that's all I'm gonna say.
I'd sell Ryan all my Elvis champions if I had them.
Right. So I think it's interesting, though, to see that there's a little bit of lateral movement here, and we have, in one hand, an already bloated market that people are moving into that's getting even more bloated in sports cards. And you have a high-end collectible market that you're seeing kind of what happened a couple of years ago with Magic start to happen again. And it's been happening for a little bit, but you're still not to the point where you have old school cards randomly spike to $100 and just sit there for months on end.
Yeah.
So kind of thought it was worth mentioning and bringing up, at least, because
Absolutely.
It is something that kind of does affect the MTG finance market, because a lot of the big money might be divesting from this and moving into these other markets. So
okay. Yeah, for sure. Then the last kind of changeover, and I'm not terribly familiar with it, is basically the move from Magic into Yu-Gi-Oh. Yu-Gi is a game that I deal with. I've been asked to buy it here and there. I am not terribly good at it because it changes all the time. But it is another game that can be nostalgia driven, and we do have an example of somebody who's made that lateral movement in TCG gaming. They still do some Magic stuff here and there, but their YouTube channel and a lot of their social media now is basically taken over by Yugi, because there's a ton of value to be extracted all over that game if you know where to look.
Yeah.
And that's not something we. I don't want to speak for both of us, but I can't really guide on Yugi outside from a handful of cards and certain sets. Similarly, if you have something to say about Yugi.
Oh, I was going to say it's also interesting and worth noting that in both the case of Les Alex and TCG, at one point, Les Alex was on the front page as a sponsored content creator for Wizards, participated in that. TCG's been working for vendors. He's another admin they're another admin of Sick Deals. So like, this is something that you're seeing people who are in the community do. And I'm like you. I have no knowledge of Yu-Gi-Oh whatsoever.
Yeah.
Does nothing for me.
Yeah. So what I was going to mention is that the lateral shift from Magic into games like Yu-Gi and DB Super, which is also up and coming, and going through its own financial growths and pains, is always an avenue for people to take on. These games are playable. There are environments for them. Obviously, now is probably not the time to go looking for your local play group and see what they're interested in. But these are alternative markets that are always hot. Super is the newest thing, and people are buying it all over the place. And that's a card game that, if you've never seen it or played it, one, looks extraordinary because almost everything comes in foil. I have like 4 pieces of bulk here that I got with a Magic card order. Like, these things look amazing. There are walls of text, and the game promotes you for just staying on theme and playing a deck full of your favorite character. And it's basically, this is a description that people use for fighting game, like certain matches, where it's just heavy punch. It's all the matchup is. Certain characters versus certain characters is just heavy punch the match. That's all Dragon Ball is. You just have no early game, and you're just swinging haymakers. So it's everything you ever want to mimic from the show in a card game in that location. And they are trimming the rules. I think there's a little bit of an issue in translation originally, much like there was for the first little bit of Yugi. Like, translating that game over didn't work out for the first couple of years. But things are kind of falling in line and making a lot more sense than they used to. And the game is just picking up much faster than Final Fantasy, but is definitely something you can look into and move. There's a bit of market manipulation that they've been seeing because they never really had a marketplace DB Super. So once it hit TCG Player and people were able to move stock, they began seeing a lot more buyouts than they had previously when it was just Facebook Marketplace. But if you're able to buy in, it's definitely a game that has staying power for the interim.
And the interesting thing about DBZ especially is that DBZ has had, I have lost count of how many failed card games.
Oh, yeah.
But every single time, it gets closer to reiterating exactly what you want from a DBZ game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think Super is actually potentially the best one we've had so far, because like you said, it's heavy punch, heavy punch, heavy punch.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's another instance where you have people our age that grew up watching it that now have all this disposable income that are going to start, well, I guess I can relive a little bit of my childhood in my free time. Mm-hmm. And it's not like you're going anywhere during quarantine, so I guess I'll play a bunch of camera matches and watch old reruns of DBZ.
Yeah.
So it's kind of got a very serendipitous timing.
Yeah.
Unintentionally.
We've mentioned the Transformers game, and I don't know anybody who's bought into or plays that, but if there was another game to come out before or after Transformers and just dunk that game into oblivion, Super would be it.
Yeah. If WotC didn't already do it themselves.
Yeah. But the fact that they started Transformers without a vision for tournament play because they just wanted it to be kitchen table, and then people are like, well, wait a minute, this is good enough to play tournaments. Like, that's fuel to the fire. But
yeah,
that just goes against the view they had for that game, and I'm okay giving the benefit of the doubt there if they knew from the beginning that they just did not want to support that. But that speaks nothing to how well the game is made. I've seen some of the cards but not played it yet, so that's neither here nor there.
Fair.
So I think that's probably it for additional content creators. Any other alternative markets, lateral moves?
Not as far as like TCG to TCG. This is going to be a two-parter though, and next week we'll get into some other stuff that people are moving into. But I think, the thing to really keep an eye on as navigating this, trying to see what other markets are starting to develop, because you don't really have an LGS to rely on
Mm-hmm.
necessarily if you don't have in-store events. So, just strike up a conversation like, hey, how's, TCG sales going? Have you seen different games doing well for you? Are you going to start doing Yu-Gi-Oh? Are you going to start doing this? Just to kind of get a feel for what's going on there because, at the end of the day, a lot of us are dependent on our local markets. And if they don't have the stuff there, then, well, I guess you're out, because
exactly.
you got to be able to pick stuff up.
Just because a game looks good and is playable, if doesn't mean that there will be a community to support it locally. And you can look at Buddy Fight, Card Fight Vanguard, Wipe Schwarz, all the other DBZ card games, Naruto. I'm missing something else that came out in the last.
Versus system is still around.
Both versions of the Versus system. Yep.
Yeah, there's a ton of them. There's still active communities for the original L5R game, not the new LCG, the old one.
The old one, yeah.
Pocketed throughout the country, and it just depends on what your local market has.
Yep.
So.
Final Fantasy, that's the other one I was trying to think of. Like, the U.S. loves Final Fantasy, not nearly as much as Japan, and the cards look amazing, but those
cards are incredible.
There's just no gaming community to really support it. So the singles are moving, but just to collectors, and that's it. The demand is purely collector's value, and when that happens, vendors start ordering less, and then eventually less, and the game goes out of print. So, like the other games I rattled off, again, came and went. The art for them looked amazing. Some of their systems were great. Some of them have problems optioning properties in the case of Wipe Schwarz. But no communities to drive that stuff. So, here we are. Picks?
Yes, let's get away to picks. And if you don't mind, I'll start.
No, you're more than welcome to.
So this one, and we're going to give a shout out to Mr. James out there at MDariel. I told you would like my pick this week based on our conversation. So mine is fairly easy. Reserveless foils. We were talking on Twitter about old border foils, 7th edition, everything else, and how that's kind of evolved. So the reason, and specifically the one on the site, is Deranged Hermit as an example. So reserveless foils that are under $100, as you see these soft RL foils like Glorious Anthem and stuff like that are basically reserveless because of the old border, the foiling technique, etc. That's those sub $100 cards. It's like Weatherseed Treefolk, Second Chance, Deranged Hermit, Multani Marrow Sorcerer, Claws of Gix or Ring of Gix, the one that's the hand with the ring, I guess.
Yeah, ring. Yeah.
These have to rise as those soft RL foils rise.
Yes.
Because these cards aren't getting printed at all. We could get another Glorious Anthem. We could get another Llanowar Elves or Birds of Paradise foil. We can never get another Multani foil. We can never get another Deranged Hermit foil. Those just don't exist for us anymore.
Nope.
So inevitably, they're going to start ticking up towards $100. And if you take a look, and specifically for Deranged Hermit, I'm talking set foil, not
F&M.
Judge or FNM or whatever
F&M.
it was.
Judge, no, you're right. Judge.
Yeah, you can still get, in some cases, Japanese foils of Deranged Hermit for less than $100, which is absurd to me. And if you look at stocks, are low right now on these foils, $20. Oh wait, sorry, that's not foils.
Yeah, that's 81.
I'm an idiot. Yeah, $80. So there's only a $20 wiggle room between market and our target here. But there's three things certain in life: death, taxes, the reserve list increasing in price. And this is a prime opportunity that's basically like investing in a CD or something at a much better rate than what you can get a Lotus for.
Mm-hmm.
You will absolutely get a return on this. This is like one of my most sure, you cannot fail picks that I will ever make on this show, is getting in on reserveless foils for less than $100. English LP foil low for Deranged Hermit is $62, shipping included.
Jeez.
It's just absurd to me.
It is, especially with a card like that. Everything you mentioned, while not iconic, is still under $100. Radiant Archangel might be the only one that's not $100 yet that you didn't mention.
Yeah.
Otherwise, all the other cards that you would think are from Legacy are over. Um, and the fact that there's a trend for the reserve list, and these are the first foils on the reserve list, the first set in foil, adds more credence.
Yeah. And it's, they have the benefit of the soft reserve list and hard reserve list. And yeah, sure enough, Radiant is $60, but there's only 3 listings between 60 and 200 that are less than 100.
There you go. Who's the artist on Radiant?
Sutphin, Michael Sutphin, okay. I think. Michael, one of the two.
I don't know. Yeah, I knew Rebecca Guay did some Archangel. I just couldn't remember which one it was.
Yeah.
But no, I like it, and this is definitely something that you can move into and feel safe on, because eventually Byleth will pick these up as they have, the wide net to cast when it comes to sales. How deep you want to go is kind of up to you and your wallet. The moment there's a run on them, FOMO is going to kick in, and you'll be able to sell it. If you're able to get a gradable copy, like that's just printing money right there, and that would be the hope. If I were going to start buying some of these reserve list foils, would be looking for gradable bills essentially. But I like the pick. I'm also on the reserve list this week, just on the garbage end of it.
Okay.
My pick is Bubble Matrix, a card I've been watching for about a month and a half, pretty keenly. Yeah, 4 CMC artifact, all damage dealt to creatures is reduced to 0. So when I first started watching this card, CK was buying 14 at $1.14. When I threw this out as on our show notes, they moved it up to 18 at $1.30, and they're now currently buying the same quantity, 18, this time for $1.80. So in the last 4 days, it's jumped almost 50 cents on the CK buy list. TCG player, the overall counts haven't changed a whole hell of a lot. There was 186 unique prices across all conditions at a $2.20 market when I first started tracking. Now we're down to 150 all conditions at about a $3.75 market. So we've seen a decrease in stock, increase in price, as expected. But there's a lot of chaff on here. You start filtering for light play and near mint, and you're down to 55 total. A couple foreign language, but the majority of them are English. So 55 left of probably over 100 from when I first started tracking. It was early on, so I hadn't started tracking the number of LP and near mint, just all copies, which I realized was a mistake shortly thereafter. But the data was not retrievable. As far as playability goes, this is just purely Commander, and it's kind of all over the place. Yeah, a bit. It's definitely in the pillow fort side of things, and you don't see that in the top commanders, but when you scroll down and you start looking at the top creatures it's paired with, you have Feldegriff, questing Feldegriff. Those are, aside from Tristani, the pillow fort commanders. What's interesting now is that people are getting aggressive with questing Beast and doing a little bit of a reanimator thing with Kenrith, and that allows you to just take one creature and ride it to victory, when it can just keep swinging into combat without consequences. And all you have to do is worry about either reanimating it with Kenrith, or in the fact of questing Beast, your general just costs 4, so you just keep ramping into it. Paired with things like Spore Frog, this just basically makes your creature immune to damage in all shapes and forms. And it just kind of creates this obnoxious game state where if you decide to go wide afterwards, after your sub-theme is tokens like we see in the display, now all your little guys don't take damage, and you just create this amassing army of ever-growing creatures that don't die to damage. It's not the best theme overall, because it does get pretty obnoxious compared to a standard Pillow Fort build, which basically just lets everybody play the game and then just boom, win. But when you look at the way Feldegriff used to play, which is just giving people a bunch of tokens and eventually just make more tokens to win, it makes sense. Being on the reserve list, it gets that bump as well. But the steady trend from a courier release on through basically kind of tells us that we're going to see this card not return back to the over or almost $10 it was almost a little over a year ago. But we're going to see...
I thought it was last year.
Yeah, Jan 19. It will climb out of its hole. We just kind of steadily slid into nothingness. But now that we've got new creatures in Kenrith, in Questing Beast, and some more reprints of cards like Seedborn Muse that fit this, and the Spore Frog reprint, this allows a lot more people to kind of reach into this deck and pick it up. I think 6 to 9 months from now is where you're going to be able to get out at a break even to buy list if you're able to get in around $3.50. If you wanted to start making a profit on buy list, I think you're going to have to wait almost a year for this, unless something just pulls attention to this card like we've talked about previously, or there's a run on the reserve list and this gets swept up in it. I don't think it's going to pick up that any faster than 12 months from now for a profit from buy list.
And I think that this is also the type of thing that people kind of forgot that it existed until it hit the $10 boom last year during a little bit of reserve list fudgery. And I don't know that people who had it, who were like, oh, this is $10 now, I'm going to put it in my trade binder. It's probably still sitting in the trade binders, and they probably think it's still worth $10. And a lot of times when you're like, oh no, it's only $3, well, they become less attached to it, and it's a lot easier to pick up.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
It's also something, people have in bulk. Sometimes the thing about this era is that there are so many rare cards that were just bad because EDH didn't exist, and this card screams EDH now. And I think that it may be the case of, like you said, when we're getting all of these creatures that interact favorably with it. It's more eyes is only good for it, and the more eyes that get on there, the better it is, the more viable it becomes. And I mean, if you look at it, you go from $3 to $5 pretty quickly on the listings. It's literally the second listing on the second page hits $5, and then it just goes up from there. So it's getting in at $3 now seems really solid. I like the pick.
Yeah, I it's just one of those things. Like I said, the more they build creatures with trample, the better this card gets, and the more creatures that we had, especially with Ikoria, things like this just get better over time, and I think this is going to age well.
Yeah.
So we can look at this and see organic. I brought the graph up a couple of times, sliding it around. You can see this did nothing until Ixalan, and then it ran up really quick and then came back down because the demand wasn't there yet. Now we're seeing organic demand. So
yeah,
I like this as a long-term investment, if you want to call it that. So, but I think that's going to be it for this side of things this week. Next week we will continue the collectible conversation, stepping away from TCGs and moving into some other odds and ends. But until then, I am at Haltime Reptar on Twitter. We are at MtG Cabal Cast on Twitter, Patreon, Facebook, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube.
We're on a lot of stuff now. That's
we are.
A good thing.
And we can find you on Twitter at
Thirsty Sizzler.
We'll see you guys next week.